Hello everybody, welcome to our webinar. And I can see some new faces here. So let me give you a brief introduction. My name is Eva Jan. I am the WiN Global WiN for Peace leader, and we founded this our group at the beginning of this year to cover the areas of nuclear non-proliferation, safeguards, export controls, and disarmament, with the final ultimate objective to bring more women into this domain, because I think it's really important that more women work on peace matters. So today I'm going to talk about Iran's nuclear program and why it's considered to be of concern. And if you have any questions at any time, feel free to interrupt me. We will also have a question and answer session at the end if you have any questions. And we will have a brief poll at the end as well, just to see how much you have understood from what I'm going to say. So let me start by sharing my presentation. One moment. So let's go to the first slide. Okay, I hope you can all see it. So WiN for Peace webinar, Iran's nuclear program and why is it of concern? Before I start, I want to briefly introduce our group to you, and I hope you will be interested in joining or at least in attending some of our webinars. So we currently have 16 members from the WiN global community, and we have 2 supporters, the Vienna Center for Disarmament and Non-Proliferation, the VCDNP, and the UN Office for Disarmament Affairs, UNODA, at both of them based in Vienna. Our objectives are to promote activities, training, and collaboration in those 4 areas that I mentioned before. That's nuclear non-proliferation, safeguards, export control, nuclear disarmament, to increase the number of female professionals in this field. So I understand that some of the audience has a good knowledge about non-proliferation. Some of you may not be so familiar, but we just want to tell you what it's all about, and maybe you are interested in pursuing a career in this field. It's a very interesting field. We promote the exclusively peaceful use of nuclear energy, and we do this by conducting regular meetings and events to discuss relevant topics. We also conduct educational and training sessions for WiN Global members, mostly in virtual form. Maybe we will have another event during the WiN Global Annual Conference in physical form. And we cooperate with different organizations and individuals, for example, with the IAEA, the UNODA, VCDNP, I've mentioned already, the Institute for Nuclear Materials Management, Atomic Reporters, ICANN, the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons, etc. Our events are open to all WiN Global members, so please feel free to, if you're not yet a member of WiN Global, feel free to join. Just Google Women in Nuclear Global. That will direct you to the website of WiN Global, and there you can fill out the form so that you can join. It's free of charge, and it's a great network that gives you a lot of professional opportunities. So let's look at our plan of activities for this year. So we started off our group with an inauguration ceremony in late February, where we also talked about some of the foundations of the international non-proliferation regime. About a month ago, we talked about safeguards basics, and we also covered some implementation experiences at ABAC, Euratom, and at the Argentine nuclear regulator. And today we are going to talk about Iran's nuclear program. And next we will talk about export controls in June, the EQ Khan in July, disarmament in August, September. And in October, the VCDNP is going to give us a presentation, and which may also include a presentation on AUKUS. And then we have some unscheduled topics. And of course, this is subject to change. So without further ado, let me give you an outline of what we are going to talk about. First of all, we will cover the nuclear fuel cycle and look at how a fissile material is produced from a non-proliferation point of view. We will also look at some basic concepts like what is a chain reaction, what is criticality, what are thermal neutrons and fast neutrons, and what are the proliferation concerns related especially to enrichment and reprocessing. We will then look at the timeline of Iran's nuclear program and its nuclear fuel cycle, at IAEA safeguards and the involvement of the P5+1. Then the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, the JCPOA, and Iran's main commitments, as well as the P5+1 commitments, UN Security Council Resolution 2231, and then the US withdrawal from the JCPOA in 2018 and what has happened since then and because of it. I would like to make the following disclaimer. This presentation is solely based on information from open sources. I am not disclosing any IAEA safeguards confidential information, and this is a technical and non-political presentation. So why am I giving this presentation? Some of you may know that I worked as an IAEA safeguards inspector until 2016. During those years of inspecting several countries in the world, I conducted about 40 inspections to Iran. So I've spent about 1.5 years of my life in Iran. I was also the IAEA Department of Safeguards country officer for Iran for 5 years. And I was acting as senior inspector of the Iran task force during the JPOA period. So that was the joint plan of action, which was then succeeded by the JCPOA. And I was also the acting senior inspector during the JCPOA preparation period, which was a crazy period because it involved a lot of work and a lot of inspections and coordination of inspectors. Okay, so let's start with just looking at the nuclear fuel cycle and just refresh your knowledge about it. So I guess all of you will know that in order to produce nuclear fuel, you need either uranium or thorium. So you need to mine it and to mill it. So that's the very first step of the nuclear fuel cycle, is mining and milling. Then you need to convert the yellow cake that comes out from the mining stage and milling stage into something that can be used either for fuel fabrication. That's the case for natural uranium reactors, which run on natural uranium where you don't need the enrichment step. Or if you have a reactor that needs enriched uranium, you need to have an enrichment facility where you enrich the uranium, where you concentrate the U-235 part in the natural uranium. So you need to convert the yellow cake into, usually it's UF6 that is fed into centrifuges. So in the conversion stage, you change from U308 to UF6, then you enrich the uranium, then you have the enriched UF6 that comes out from that process, and then you need to convert the UF6 into UO2 in the fuel fabrication plant. You need to, so it comes out as a powder. You need to press the powder into pellets, put the pellets into rods, assemble the rods into assemblies. All this is done at the fuel fabrication plant. And once you have the fuel, you stick it into your power plant to produce electricity, and you keep it there for a couple of years. And when the U-235 is almost gone, or much of it is gone, you take it out again, and you either store it in the spent fuel pond, usually, or later on in dry storage. Or if you want to reuse the material, you send it to a reprocessing plant. So in a reprocessing plant, you separate the uranium and the plutonium from the fission products, which are created during the neutron bombardment. And in the next step, you separate the uranium from the plutonium. So you can reutilize that uranium by putting it back into the conversion and enrichment and fuel fabrication process. And you can also reuse the plutonium in form of so-called mixed oxide fuel, where you mix uranium and plutonium and also use it for fuel. So there are some reactors in the world which run on mixed oxide fuel or MOX fuel. So this is the diagram of the nuclear fuel cycle. If we look at the relationship between the nuclear fuel cycle and nuclear weapons. So in the nuclear fuel cycle, you use fission energy for nuclear power generation and electricity production, whereas in nuclear weapons, you use the fission energy for military use. And the prerequisite for both is fissile material, which is to be split by neutrons. So fissile material can be either U-235 or plutonium-239 or U-233. So let's look how this material is created in the nuclear fuel cycle. If you look at U-235, which is used by most reactor types and also in some types of nuclear weapons, U-235 is obtained by enriching natural uranium, where you separate and concentrate the U-235 in the natural uranium. So if you look at the left bottom picture, you see a card with uranium occurring in nature, which contains just about 0.71% of U-235. So what do? You want to concentrate that U-235, you take the uranium to an enrichment plant. And in order to use the fuel in a nuclear power reactor, you need usually an enrichment between 3 to 5%. And some research reactors use fuel enriched up to 20%. And in a nuclear weapon, of course, you use exactly the same process in order to concentrate the U-235 more and more and more until you obtain so-called weapons-grade uranium, which has an enrichment of 90% and above. How do you obtain plutonium? So plutonium does not occur in nature. You need a reactor in order to produce the plutonium. And so you irradiate the uranium in the reactor. It becomes plutonium of what doesn't fission, captures neutrons, and eventually turns into different isotopes of plutonium. You are especially interested in plutonium-239 because of its special properties. So you obtain it by reprocessing. It means by separating the plutonium from the uranium and from the fission products. You do this in a reprocessing plant, as I showed you on the chart before. And I've also mentioned that it's used in some reactors in the form of mixed oxide fuel or MOX fuel. And of course, some nuclear weapon types also use plutonium. I'm going to talk about that later. Last but not least, we have U-233, which is obtained by irradiating thorium-232, which then captures the neutrons and goes into U-233. And so you have some thorium-based reactors which use thorium, which irradiate thorium, for example, molten salt reactors, and where you produce the U-233 and take advantage of that chain reaction, the fissile material. And some nuclear weapon types also use U-233, but the most common ones are plutonium and U-235. That's why I'm going to concentrate on those two. Last time we covered the concept of significant quantity, or SQ, which is the approximate amount of nuclear material for which the possibility of manufacturing a nuclear explosive device cannot be excluded. This is an IAEA concept that the IAEA uses to determine how many inspections it needs to conduct at which facilities. And an SQ should not be confused with a critical mass. A critical mass is the smallest amount of fissile material that you need for a sustained nuclear chain reaction, because the SQ also takes into account some losses during the process of converting the nuclear material and during the relevant manufacturing processes. So the IAEA has established the following significant quantities. So for plutonium and U-233, it's 8 kilograms. For uranium enriched up to 20%, it's 25 kg of U-235. And for uranium with an enrichment, sorry, that was above. Sorry, that's for an enrichment above 20%, that is considered to be highly enriched uranium in IAEA standards. That's 25 kilograms. Whereas anything up to 20% enrichment is considered as low enriched uranium, and here the significant quantity is 75 kg. Natural uranium is 10 tons, and thorium or depleted uranium 20 tons. Okay, let me refresh your memory. I'm sure most of you know what the chain reaction is, and it's used in both the peaceful and the non-peaceful applications of nuclear energy. So it is based on the splitting of the heavy nucleus by a neutron and the release of energy, and also of 2 to 3 new neutrons, which then continue creating reactions until the reaction increases. So more and more neutrons are split by those those fissions. Also, let's look at the concept of criticality. So you have three types of critical systems. So one is subcritical, then critical, and supercritical. In a subcritical system, there are fewer neutrons than required to sustain the chain reaction, and the reaction will eventually die off. In a critical system, you have the same amount of neutrons produced as absorbed. This is done in a reactor and with the use of a moderator and control rods. And in a supercritical system, there is an excess number of neutrons, and this leads to a rapid growth in the fission rate and in the release of vast amounts of energy, and this is what is used in nuclear weapons. So let's just look at this concept on this chart. So on the left-hand side, you see the subcritical mass, where the rate of neutron loss is greater than the rate of neutron creation, and the system doesn't go anywhere, it will die off. In the middle, you have the critical mass, where the rate of neutron loss equals the rate of neutron creation by fission. And on the right-hand side, you have the subcritical mass, where the rate of neutron loss is smaller than the rate of neutron creation by fission. So the middle one pertains to reactors, and the right one to nuclear weapons. What are thermal neutrons? So when there's a fission reaction, the neutron that comes out from that fission is very fast, and the probability that it will fission another nucleus is very low. That is why in reactors, moderators are used to slow down those fast neutrons and to increase the probability of a fission reaction. There are basically 3 types of moderators that are used in reactors, depending on the type of reactors. So there are light water reactors, which are the standard reactors, which use slightly enriched uranium, the 3 to 5% that I mentioned at the beginning. Then there are heavy water reactors, which use natural uranium, so they don't need enrichment. And there are graphite moderated reactors. Those are basically the old UK reactors. In order to maintain that system in that critical state that I described earlier, and to avoid supercriticality, you use control rods. So here at the bottom chart, you can see how the moderation works, and how the fast neutrons are converted into slow neutrons, which enable another fission reaction. In a nuclear weapon, you are not interested in any moderation, but you are interested in those fast neutrons. So you don't have a moderator, but you want a system that achieves supercriticality super fast. so which leads to this detonation. Let's look at the nuclear weapon types, or some nuclear weapon types. If we think of the first generation of nuclear weapons, they were basically the so-called gun type assembly and the implosion weapon. And in the gun type assembly, this was the nuclear weapon that was used on Hiroshima in August 1945. You can see that it's two hemispheres of U-235 that are maintained subcritical until a conventional chemical explosive is ignited, and then the two spheres are pressed together, and that creates the supercritical mass, which leads to the explosion. Whereas, and here, as you can see, it's U-235 that is used for a gun type assembly. For an implosion weapon, you use plutonium-239. So you have this small core of uranium-239, which is surrounded by high explosive lenses. And if you implode those lenses, the core is compressed, which becomes supercritical and which then leads to the explosion. Of course, a lot has happened since those two, and the implosion weapon was detonated over Nagasaki, so that was a plutonium weapon. And since then, of course, there have been a lot of developments in the nuclear weapons area. So the more advanced nuclear weapons use fusion reactions. There is, for example, a boosted fission weapon, which uses a small amount of fusion fuel to increase the rate and the yield of the field reaction. And then there are the so-called hydrogen bombs or thermonuclear devices, which have two main components. So in the primary stage, you have a fission reaction, which is either fueled by HEU or by plutonium-239, followed, which then create the fusion secondary stage, which contains deuterium and tritium. So you see, you have deuterium 2H and tritium 3H, which fuse, which eject the neutron, and helium 4 is formed, so which releases the energy. So let's look at which steps of the nuclear fuel cycle where the fissile material is obtained. And I think we can easily say, based on what we have just learned, so the U-235, the highly enriched, the low enriched or high enriched uranium can be obtained in the enrichment process. Whereas in order to obtain plutonium, you need the whole nuclear fuel cycle up to the reactors and the reprocessing plant. So many more steps are needed for plutonium production. And so you need both a reactor and a separation plant. So as you can see, those two steps in the nuclear fuel cycle, enrichment and reprocessing, are the most sensitive parts of the nuclear fuel cycle, and that's why they are really well protected. There are just a few countries which have enrichment and or reprocessing plants. And both could be used for the production of fissile material for nuclear weapons. So this can happen either by enriching uranium above the levels required for a reactor if a country has an enrichment program, or by separating plutonium from irradiated reactor fuel if a country has a reprocessing plant. And this could be done either at declared facilities by misusing those declared facilities. So the IAEA could inspect the facilities, but they could still be misused. Or of course, a state could also operate some undeclared facilities if the state has the knowledge of how to construct an enrichment or a reprocessing plant and has the reactor, etc., and all the other infrastructure. So what are the proliferation concerns related to uranium enrichment? Please have a look at this chart on the right. On the x-axis, you have the U-235 content in an enrichment process. So it goes from the natural uranium, which is 0.71% U-235 up to 100% enriched. And on the y-axis, you have the effort that is required in order to enrich. The measurement here is called SWU, separative work unit, which is the effort that is required to separate the isotopes of U-235 and U-238 during the enrichment process. I'm not going to go into too much details, but just note how much effort is required to enrich from the natural uranium level to, let's say, up to 5%. You can see that most effort goes into that step to enrich to reactor, to a power reactor grade level 4 to 5%. In order to produce 20% enriched, like for example for research reactors, much less SWU is needed for that. And if you want to go from 20% to 90% to weapons grade, you can see that the curve is really flat. So once you obtain a certain level of enrichment, once you have a certain UF6 enriched to a certain percentage of uranium, the higher the enrichment, the easier it is to enrich further. This is the point I'm trying to make here. Let's look at concerns related to heavy water reactors. So I have told you that moderators are used to slow down the neutrons to increase the fission probability. And I've also mentioned the 3 types of moderators: graphite, light water, and heavy water. And heavy water has the property that it has a high moderating ratio and a low absorption cross section for neutrons. So it's a good moderator. The advantage is that it can use natural uranium, so you don't need an enrichment program for to run a heavy water reactor. Like for example, CANDU reactors, which are used in Canada, are heavy water reactors. But of course, you need to have a production of heavy water, so the process to produce heavy water is not very easy. So you need that infrastructure, and you need large amounts of heavy water for that. And of course, from a proliferation point of view, heavy water reactors produce much more plutonium than reactors using enriched uranium, because you just have more U-238, which capture the neutrons to turn it to U-235, whereas the U-235 in the reactor fuel would fission. So let's now look at a timeline of Iran's nuclear program, and I've tried to summarize it into a very short overview, because a lot of things have been going on in Iran's nuclear program, and we really cannot go into the details of everything. Just for you to know that in 1967, Iran obtained a 5-megawatt thermal research reactor from the US under the Atoms for Peace program, which was installed in Tehran at the nuclear site there, the AUOI site. That was the time when Iran and the US had good relations. And in the 1970s, the Shah of Iran planned to have to construct 23 reactors, and they gave a contract to Germany to start constructing 2 reactors at Bushehr. In 1979, the revolution happened, and Khomeini took over, and he stopped the Shah's nuclear program, and he said nuclear is haram and no nuclear, and he also stopped all international cooperation, so the construction at Bushehr also stopped. 1 year later, the Iran-Iraq war started, which took until 1989. And just after the start, Khomeini changed his mind and he restarted Iran's nuclear program. After the war was over, Russia then continued this construction at the Bushehr plant. So it was originally a Siemens type reactor, and the Russians fit a VVER type reactor into that infrastructure that was already available. At that time, during the 90s, Iran also built a uranium conversion facility based on Chinese design, and it obtained centrifuge and nuclear weapon designs from A.Q. Khan. And AQ Khan is a figure which we will cover in more detail in a special presentation because of the role he has played in nuclear non-proliferation here, this network. So in 2002, the NCRI, the National Council for Resistance of Iran, alleged the existence of an underground uranium enrichment plant at Natanz and a heavy water plant near Arak. And I was working as an open source analyst at the Department of Safeguards at that time, and we just got this news article in about the discovery of the announcement of the NCRI, and we were made to search for where is Natanz, where is Arak, what is there related to enrichment and reprocessing in Iran, because the IAEA at that time had no idea about what was going on in these two domains. In 2009, then, Iran admitted the existence of the Fordo uranium enrichment facility. And it's notable that Fordo is inside a mountain, and it's down right inside the mountain. It's so it's a very well fortified tunnel, and it's located near the city of Qom, south of Tehran. In 2011, Iran started enriching at 20%. First, it started at Natanz, later at Fordo, and by 2013, Iran had reached a stockpile of enriched UF6 up to 20% of 200 kg. So since then, if we look at the nuclear fuel cycle, you can see that Iran has developed a really extensive nuclear fuel cycle. So it has or had mines and mills at Gashvin and Sagand and Ardakan. It has this uranium conversion facility near Esfahan to convert the U308 to UF6. It has two enrichment facilities at Natanz. One is a small R&D facility above ground, and then there's this huge hole underground at Natanz. And it also has this one fortified enrichment facility at Fordo, which I've mentioned. It also has the capability to convert enriched UF6 to UO2, and also to produce uranium metal. And it can also produce research and power reactor fuel. It has the facility, it's all on that Esfahan site. Iran has one nuclear power reactor, which is the Bushehr reactor, which was, as I mentioned, completed by Russia. And it has one research reactor using 20% enriched uranium fuel. This Tehran reactor, which it obtained in 1967 from the US, which is still running. At that time, it was outside Tehran. Now it's in the middle of the city because the city has expanded so much. And I mentioned to you this heavy water program that was announced by the NCRI. So when the IAEA investigated about that heavy water reactor, heavy water plant, it also discovered that Iran was actually constructing a heavy water reactor, the so-called IR-40, near that heavy water plant. So let's look now at safeguards in Iran and the role of the P5+1. So Iran was actually one of the first countries to sign the Non-Proliferation Treaty in 1968, and its comprehensive safeguards agreement entered into force in 1974. In the 1990s, there were already allegations that Iran had a nuclear weapons program. It were allegations in open sources, but these could not be confirmed by the IAEA at that time. So in 2003, following that disclosure of the NCRI in August of 2002, this resulted in a major IAEA investigation following the exposure of that enrichment and heavy water program, and also to the disclosure of some undeclared activities in nuclear material. So Iran suspended the conversion and enrichment activities at that time and voluntarily implemented the AP. And there were some negotiations going on between Iran and some member states. But then in 2006, President Mahmoud Ahmadinejad became took over, and he was a bit radical, so he lifted that suspension and he stopped the voluntary implementation of the additional protocol. And this led to the referral of the Iran file to the UN Security Council by the IAEA and resulted in the imposition of UN sanctions on Iran. Between 2012 and 2013, the IAEA tried to negotiate the so-called structured approach with Iran to resolve some past issues related to the possible military dimensions of Iran's nuclear program. Simultaneously, Iran was sanitizing the Pachin site where some of those activities were suspected to have taken place. But all those negotiations did not lead to anything. And so in 2013, President Rouhani succeeded President Ahmadinejad, and he had a less confrontational approach. And those negotiations with the P5+1 commenced. And there was an interim agreement, the so-called JPOA, the Joint Plan of Action, which was signed in 2014, where Iran agreed to scale down some of the aspects of its nuclear program. And also it gave the IAEA more access. For example, at that time, we had daily access by IAEA inspectors to all enrichment facilities, but many other provisions as well. Finally, in 2015, on 14th of July, so that's the French Independence Day, Iran and the P5+1 signed the JCPOA to limit Iran's nuclear program. And this program, JCPOA was incorporated into UN Security Council Resolution 2231. And at the end of that year, the IAEA issued a board report on the possible military dimensions, where the IAEA never closes an issue, so the IAEA put it at rest until some new information comes out. Which happened later on. And in January 2016, the JCPOA implementation started, the sanctions were lifted, and the IAEA issues the quarterly reports on the JCPOA implementation. So what were the major commitments by Iran under the JCPOA? First of all, for an indefinite period of time, Iran committed to fully implement the NPT and the additional protocol, and to give the IAEA extensive access, and to adhere to all NPT terms indefinitely. For 25 years, Iran committed that the IAEA would have full access to the whole fissile material supply chain, including mines and mills. You may remember from my previous presentation that usually the IAEA under a CSA does not go to mines and mills, so ore is outside of safeguards. But in the case of Iran, the whole supply chain was covered. And also the IAEA would have access to Iran's centrifuge development and production facilities. So anywhere where they are producing centrifuges or the rotors or any other components, the IAEA would have access. For 15 years, Iran committed to enrich to a maximum of 3.667% of U-235 and to maintain a maximum uranium stockpile of 300 kg of UF6. Moreover, the facility at Fordo, the centrifuges that were installed there were supposed to be used for the stable isotope production, so not for any uranium enrichment, but for producing stable isotopes. And there would be no new construction of heavy water reactors, and the IR-40 would be converted to use enriched fuel, which would limit the production of plutonium-239, and also to limit the amount of heavy water in stock. And for 10 years, There would be a limit of operating centrifuges, so they would only be operated at Natanz, and the maximum number would be 5,060 centrifuges and all types of centrifuges. And there would be no enrichment via advanced centrifuges, so only IR1s. IR1s are the very old types that Iran got from the AQ Khan in the 1980s, 90s. What did the P5+1 commit to? So the EU would lift all nuclear-related financial and economic sanctions. The US would suspend all secondary sanctions on Iran's financial and energy sector and remove several proliferation-related entities from the blacklist. And for Iran's ballistic missile program, there would be UN restrictions on the ballistic missiles activities for 8 years. So 2016, so next year would be 8 years when this provision should be lifted. So the United Nations endorsed the JCPOA by UN Security Council Resolution 2231. And this led to the termination of all the previous resolutions related to the Iran issue, and in particular to the UN sanctions. They were all lifted. And this UN Security Council resolution, of course, is binding for all states. And the UN Security Council also mandated the IAEA to undertake all verification activities in Iran and to monitor that Iran was complying with its nuclear-related commitments under the JCPOA and to issue those quarterly reports on the implementation of the JCPOA in Iran. So what has happened since implementation date, since the 16th of January 2016? So in early 2018, Israel claimed to have seized documents on past Iranian nuclear weapons programs from a warehouse in Tehran. So some Israeli spies entered the warehouse and stole some documents and took them to Israel, where they were evaluated, and they had been there for storage. And there were claims that Iran had maintained a nuclear weapons program in the past. In May of that year, President Trump withdrew from the JCPOA, which led to a snapback of the US sanctions, but which had an impact on the activities of other states that were not US and companies as well. As of 2019, Iran gradually started lifting its JCPOA limits on its program, and also the IAEA had conducted complementary access and taken swipe samples which showed processed natural uranium particles at some locations in Iran, where no activities had been declared in the past and where the IAEA had questions. Then in 2020, President Biden was elected in the USA. In 2021, in February, the US and the P5+1 started renegotiating the JCPOA with Iran, but there were no direct, the US was not directly involved, but it went through the other parties, so it was kind of complicated. And it took a while, and then there were the presidential elections in Iran, where President Ebrahim Raisi was elected, who was more radical than his predecessor. And there was just no progress on renegotiating the JCPOA. And as of 2022, Iran continued breaching its JCPOA commitments. And if we look at this chart now, so Iran is no more implementing the additional protocol. It's still implementing the comprehensive safeguards agreement, so at least that is good. But as you know from our previous presentations, of course, the additional protocol is really important to give the IAEA more timely access to locations. Secondly, the IAEA no more has access to Iran's mines and mills, and also not to its centrifuge development and production facilities. So the IAEA has no idea how many centrifuges Iran is producing now and where they are located. And of course, this also bears the danger that there could be a parallel enrichment program that the IAEA is not able to have knowledge about. The 3.67% enrichment has also been capped. Iran is enriching to 60% now, and the stockpile of 300 kg of UF6 has been exceeded substantially. And at Fordo, Iran is now enriching up to the 60% inside the tunnel. And it's also not respecting any limits on the heavy water stockpile. And it's not respecting the limits on the operating centrifuges. So the number is higher. And of course, it's also enriching with more advanced centrifuges, not just the IR ones. So Iran has, as I told you, on the left-hand side, you see a model of the IR1, and on the right side, you see it in a cascade arrangement, that those old types of centrifuges which were imported from the AQ Khan network. Iran also imported blueprints for the IR2, but it didn't work the same way that it was working in the original mode. So Iran now calls them IR2M, M for modified. It modified some of the internals because it didn't have some of the raw materials that it would have needed to have the original model in place. Iran has also developed IR4s, IR5s, IR6, IR8, and I think even IR10. So they are becoming bigger and bigger, and with a significant increase of the enrichment capability. And here is an aerial view of the Fordo site. So you can see the mountain in the background, and underneath, inside the mountain, you have those tunnels with the centrifuge hall. And it's at this facility that Iran is enriching up to 60%. And if we look at this chart here, which I showed you before, and you look at the red dot, which is at 60%. So if Iran wanted to enrich from 60 to 90%, very little effort would be needed to do that. Iran has also installed equipment to produce uranium metal. So in a nuclear weapon, so when material comes out from a centrifuge enrichment facility, it's in the form of UF6. If you want to use the uranium, the U-235 in a nuclear weapon, you need to convert it from UF6 to uranium metal, which is not an easy process, especially if it's highly enriched uranium, and you need to consider criticality, etc., etc. So Iran has installed equipment to produce uranium metal, and as I mentioned, a nuclear weapon core can consist either of uranium or plutonium metal, but it's important that it's in metal form and not UF6 form. So let's look at the conclusions. So as you can see, over the past 45 years, Iran has built up an indigenous nuclear fuel cycle that contains several elements that are relevant for producing fissile materials suitable for nuclear weapons. So it has uranium enrichment, uranium metal, a heavy water plant and reactor. And actually, Iran is importing all its fuel for Bushehr, so it has not used any of its enriched uranium for generating electricity. It has just used the 20% enriched uranium for its research reactor fuel, but not actually for a power reactor. Iran is enriching up to 60%, which has no obvious civilian applications. But as I've shown you on the chart, it's just one step away from enriching to weapons grade levels. The IAEA is still trying to find answers to their questions about the presence of those particles, which are probably related to historical nuclear material and activities, and Iran still hasn't given any plausible answers to questions. So Iran remains within the NPT. but its large nuclear program is only subject to comprehensive safeguards verification, no additional protocol in force. So despite all those efforts, and over the years, one can say that Iran has become a nuclear threshold state. That means it possesses both the technical and capabilities and the fissile material that it would need to make a nuclear weapon. It doesn't mean that it has a nuclear weapon, but if it takes the decision to do so, I think it would not take too much effort to do so. But of course, a nuclear weapon would need also a delivery system and many other aspects. So it would still take a while for Iran if it wanted to make a nuclear weapon to do so. The main thing would be the decision on the state level. And I think before I open the floor to questions, I suggest we make a poll. So I invite you to answer the questions that I will display now. And after that, we will have the question and answer session. So, oops. Okay, sorry. There was a way of ladies who can help me, please. I cannot. Florencia or Agostina, the poll doesn't work the way it's designed to work. Okay. Okay, you know what? Yeah, here we are. Thank you. So please, can you just answer this question? What is the main, oops, it has disappeared. What is the main concern related to Iran's nuclear program? Just choose one of these. Is it Iran's enrichment program? Is it Iran's heavy water program? Or is it Iran's mines and mills? Just click on one of those three. And I give you a few seconds for that. I give you 10 more seconds. 1, 2, or 3. 5 seconds. Okay. Florencia, can you display the results or can I? Oh, bravo. Very good. Very good. Do we have the second question as well? Florencia?
No, Eva.
Okay. Okay, no problem. Ladies, I think we are all ladies, right? So ladies, I don't see any gentlemen. So I open the floor to questions and answers. Questions and answers. I don't know whether you've put, no, you haven't put anything into the chat. So look, just feel free to raise your hand and ask me anything you want to know, and I will try to answer. Agostina, maybe you start, or Florencia.
We have a participant and wants to talk. Sorry. Can you see Eva? The participants list?
I can see the participants, but in queue. Oh, Zohre Gholamzadeh, that's the Iranian name. Hello, Zohre. Let me unmute.
Hello, thank you for your presentation. I'm Zohra Gholamzadeh. I would like you to take attention. Definitely having nuclear fuel cycle is not a concern. I would like to bring you, to your attention and other distinguished participants in this webinar that one, all nuclear material and facilities in Iran are under the agency's full safeguards. Two, the agency's inspectors visit and inspect regularly the nuclear material and nuclear fuel in accordance with Iran's comprehensive safeguards. agreements, and Iran has always facilitated the agency's monitoring and verifications activities. 3. Iran fully implemented its JCPOA commitments. The unilateral withdrawal, United States withdrawal from the JCPOA, as well as EU, Italy failure to comply with their commitments as enshrined in the JCPOA, made Iran to reduce its commitments. 4. The so-called possible military dimension PMD was closed based on the DAEA Bradoff governance in 2015. 5. On these issues, on the issues related to the so-called locations, it is necessary to mention that the origin of this issue goes back to the allegations posed by an ill-intended their party, namely the Israeli regime, which does not have a single commitment under WMD instruments, including in particular the NPT, and repeatedly threatens to attack Iran's nuclear facilities devoted to a peaceful purpose. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Ms. Zohre, for making this statement. As I said, this is a non-political presentation. It's more technical, and of course, there are many different issues involved in Iran's nuclear program, and of course, you need to see both sides. And of course, Iran complied with all JCPOA commitments until the US withdrew. And of course, Israel is outside the NPT and many other things, but I think we are not going to discuss the politics here. So, of course, Iran, we know that Iran is observing its NPT commitments under its Comprehensive Safeguards Agreement. But as you know, the additional protocol gives the IAEA additional verification rights, and it provides the IAEA with more information. So, of course, all this is clear, and there are always two sides to everything. So thank you for mentioning the Iranian side, and I'm fully aware of both sides of this. But as I said, we are not going to discuss the politics of Iran's nuclear program. And I just hope that any issues that are still open can be resolved in a peaceful manner. This is my only hope. So thank you for your comments.
Madam, thank you for your illustration. What you refer to your political issues, JCPOA locations in your presentation.
Sorry, I did what?
Should I repeat?
Yes, I didn't quite understand. Political what?
I said you referred to your political issues, JCPOA, locations in your presentation.
I'm referring to the fact that the IAEA found particles for which it is seeking explanations. So this is not a political, it's a technical issue to my mind. And I'm not involved in that anymore. And I'm just repeating what I can read from the IAEA website or from other open sources. But it's not a political issue, but it's a technical issue to my mind. Okay, does anybody else have any contribution or want to raise anything or contribute towards the discussion? You can also write the questions in the Q&A. Okay, I think everybody's shy, as I can see. If you have any suggestions about any comments on the presentation or any suggestions how to improve future webinars or anything else, please reach out to us. You have our email address. And if there are no further questions or no further comments, which I think is the case. Okay, I can see one question. I see somebody, Yasser Kazevza, who's saying hello from Tehran. Hello, Mr. Yasser. Okay, Yono Khan is saying that the chat doesn't work. Sorry about that. I think if you want to say something, please raise your hand and we will open you up for the microphone.
Eva, the chat is working, but the participants can see the message from other participants, only the panelists, okay? So if you have questions or comments, we are receiving it.
Oh, I see, okay. So Yono Khan says that, Yono Khan, would you like to pose a question? The chat does work, I can see your question. But if you want to pose a live question, please feel free. Just raise your hand, please. Okay. Okay, I think. Oh, okay. I think the questions are coming up now. Okay, Chinello, I can do that. I think this lecture will be put up on the WiN Global website in the members section for anyone who is a WiN Global member can access the presentations that we present during these webinars. I can see a question. Would you explain the role of the IAEA in this regard? I don't quite understand the role of the IAEA in the, you mean in the JCPOA? Because I explained the role of the IAEA in the JCPOA. The IAEA is not a partner of the JCPOA. It's mandated with monitoring and verifying the implementation. That's the role of the IAEA. And of course, the IAEA is a partner of Iran in the Comprehensive Safeguards Agreement. So it's an agreement between Iran and the IAEA to implement safeguards in Iran. I hope I have answered your question. I have one comment from Yuno Khan. It seems that nuclear power has become politics rather than science. Well, I hope not. I think we still will still have mostly scientific applications of nuclear energy. And but of course, as we know from the interception of nuclear power, it's a dual-use technology which was unfortunately first used for military purposes and only later on for peaceful purposes. To reduce the concern about Iran, I don't quite understand. I cannot answer on behalf of the IAEA because I'm no more working for the IAEA. And I think if the IAEA has any concerns about Iran, it would mention that in its board reports. And I think DG Gross is also in constant contact with Iran. So I don't think, I don't know about any concerns about Iran. I don't know whether this answers your question. Would you like to answer that, Mr. Yasser? Anyway, as I've said, okay, I think these are, I cannot see any more questions. So we still have some time, but I expected actually more questions. So if there are no more questions, wait. Okay, I have one question from Ajua. What will be probably a comprehensive action to make Iran's nuclear program taken off the concern table in your view? Well, as I said, I think Iran's enrichment program is quite extensive, and I think this is the major concern for people. And but it's up to Iran. I mean, it's not forbidden under the NPT to enrich, and the IAEA is monitoring Iran's enrichment program. So I think there's a lot of politics in all this, and I don't want to go into politics here. So let's just hope, as I said, that everything will be resolved in a peaceful manner. And about the presentation, I said that it would be put up on the WiN Global website in the members section. So. I would suggest, if there's no more questions, okay. Thank you, Yunok, for your comment. She thinks that nuclear energy is politically exploited all over the world, and yeah. Anyway, as we try to expand nuclear energy across the world, it has to be done in a peaceful manner, which is in the interest of everybody, because we already have about 20,000 nuclear weapons in this world, and which should have been eliminated a long time ago, and we don't need any more of those, on the contrary. So I think this brings me to the end of this webinar. And I would like to thank you for your participation. I also thank you for the comments from Iran. So this is not, as I said, not a political statement in any way. And I wish that your program continues to be, your nuclear program continues to be peaceful. and I also know that you are expanding nuclear power in the country, and I wish you good luck for that. And otherwise, I thank all the participants for your attention, and I hope to see many of you next time around when we talk about nuclear export controls, which will be sometimes in June. So without further ado, thank you, and I wish you all the best. Herewith I close.